Hey guys, Adam Mason here with the Bearder Talk podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I've been so pumped seeing all of the Instagram posts of you listening, all the Instagram stories. It's just so cool because you never know who's listening until you guys show me, and I love that. And you guys are asking questions, or some of you are following me on my personal account and asking questions about our photos there and how did I edit that and stuff like that. And so I love that. The world is out there, and it's nobody's ever going to fault you for asking questions. And so I just want to say thank you for listening. And we've got a fun one today. So this is going to be very photographer specific, but it's about second shooting. And so second shooting is essentially for weddings and events. There are one photographer, right? That's bad grammar. There's one photographer, and that's usually the lead photographer. So take your pick. We've had plenty of them on the show. So, Abby Grace, Natalie Frank, Sam Hurd, Tony Hoffer, myself, we're all the lead photographer. We kind of get our own clients. We shoot weddings full time, and that's what our job is. But there's this other thing called second shooting, and second shooting is a second photographer. And primarily that person can be somewhere between a really experienced photographer who's helping the main photographer out, or somebody who's kind of new and wanting to get into weddings, maybe get more experience shooting high-end events. And I think there are some steps that I've seen that a lot of people haven't taken in trying to get second shooting gigs. And this episode is just out of merely trying to help those folks to eliminate any confusion for people about how to go about this, or why is this important to me? Should I do second shooting? I want to eliminate any confusion on that. And then thirdly, just this, again, I want every episode here to be a resource. So if you're like, Adam, how can I do X, Y, and Z? Well, this one's going to be the second shooting one. And I think it's really important, and I actually have an outline, so I'm going to go through that. And I think second shooting has a ton of benefits. And I think if you take the time to listen to this episode, even if you're a lead photographer already, you're going to learn a lot. And you could even send this to potential second shooters as a resource to even say, hey, listen to this before you work with me. And it could kind of be a win-win for everybody. So here we go. I think when it comes to second photographers, I have this dream that I wish I could work with the same person every week at every wedding. And I would love to, pay them a lot of money, like pay them whatever it takes to have them want to work with me consistently. And, because I feel like once you have the same person, you can just build off of that. It's a lot easier after a wedding or a gig to say, hey, here's what we can do better. Here's how we can go about this, than trying out somebody new every week. And so I'm a more positive person on second shooting. A lot of photographers don't like even having second shooters. And so it can be kind of a negative thing, but that's, for me, I would love to have a second shooter at every wedding, as long as the personality and ultimately the photos, as long as those two things work out. And so this is kind of like my dream and my ideal as well, but also some practical tips. But, the goal here is really just to help aspiring photographers, or people who just got into photography, or people who have been photographers for a long time, but never shot weddings or high-end events, and maybe they want to go into that just to expand their craft or make a little bit of extra money on the weekends. Like, there's no harm in second shooting 40 weddings a year, at $400 to $600 to $1,000 a pop. Like, that's decent revenue. So anyway, personally, I think second shooting has a number of benefits, and I can't even name them all, but I made a list of 5 things that I think are absolute benefits for any person who second shoots a wedding. And these may be things that are new to you, you never thought about before, but honestly, if you're not thinking these whenever you apply for a second shooting gig, or whenever you reach out to your photographer that you want to work with, like, these are the things that you need to think about, and these are really beneficial. And ultimately, you can get these before getting your own clients, and the risk is a little less high, if you will. The risk is just a little less high. So here are some benefits to being a second shooter that I think are really, really important. So number one is just experience, right? So different clients, whether it's a couple that is doing a traditional wedding or a couple that's doing a non-traditional wedding, you're just going to have different people with different personalities that you're going to learn to read a little bit. You're going to have different wedding styles. Kind of like I said, you'd have big wedding, small wedding, a wedding where there's a photo booth, a wedding where they do table shots. Like, All of that's going to be different. And you're going to walk into a ton of different lighting situations. The more weddings and the more events you shoot, the more skilled you're going to be in just approaching different things. So one example I always give, and this is kind of silly, and I don't know, I don't have like a pretty fun, inspirational analogy for this, but like a professional plumber doesn't need to go see a bathroom before he can start thinking about how to fix it. Like, he's seen what's the things in the bathroom before, like toilet, shower, sink, shampoo, Q-tips. Like, he or she, has the presence of mind to kind of know what they're going to do and how they're going to go about it. And so as a photographer that shoots multiple events a year, that's something you should think about, is like, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. Like, you're just going to have more practice and more know-how, and you're going to get to kind of sharpen those skills that you wouldn't if you were just waiting for clients to email you. The second thing is learning. Obviously, being a second shooter is such a good learning experience. So at least for me, I love when my second photographers are asking me, Adam, what are you thinking right now? Or how are you going about that? Or where do you want me during the situation? And it shows that their mind is thinking, and it shows that they respect me, which is really cool, and I'm honored when that happens. And they want to know what's going on, and I love that. So that's something really cool. Is just the overall learning aspect of things. Thirdly is just your problem solving skills go way up. Like, the more weddings you shoot, the more you get to think about, like, oh, well, let's solve that problem. What if it rains? What if it doesn't rain? What if there's no sky? Well, there's always a sky. What if there's no clouds in the sky? Or what if it's bright sun and the ceremony is hot? Like, what are you going to do? How do you go about it? How are you going to plan how you'd like to shoot that particular thing? In addition, there's the obvious thing of building your portfolio, right? So you have an opportunity to go to another event and shoot as much as you can and try to build up your portfolio. Try to get those shots that are really going to put you on the map, that really help define your style and really help define the kind of storyteller that you want to be. A lot of my second photographers feel like they can be creative during those times, and they can kind of think a little bit out of the box when they're with me. And I love that. I love when they try and take a few chances and have a little bit of fun. And the reality too, and we'll get into this a little bit at the end of the episode, but having more weddings under your belt or more events under your belt also creates more social proof. And social proof is just proving to other people that you have the skills and can do a certain thing. And so through marketing and social media and using the photos, we'll get into a little bit about how later in the episode, but that is something a lot of people don't think about. But you can, as long as you can use the photos, then you can try and have more social proof, which proves your expertise in this matter, which is really, really cool. And then lastly, obviously, if you plan on becoming a full-time photographer, or you would like to just have better SEO or get more followers on Instagram, or just be known for what you want to be known for, is SEO and social. And so once you're able to use the photos from second shooting, like, you can leverage your own SEO and your own social for your own wedding career. And the reality is that a lot of people think like that is undercutting the main photographer, but I think as long as you do it in the correct way and you form a positive relationship, and you don't do it in a sneaky or weird way, then that's going to be totally fine. At least for me, like, all of my second photographers can use the photos, and we'll get into the contracting of that, but they can all use the photos. They just can't contact my clients. And so I always tell them, like, hey, go write a better blog than me. Go get better SEO. Go, use better hashtags. Like, find the people that want the photos that you took. So hopefully that makes sense. And, it's like, when a photographer asks for a second shooter, this can be your time to shine, right? So you'll know these things. You'll be like, okay, this is what I want. This is what I want to do. And ultimately, we're about to get into how to get more second shooting gigs and how to actually go about getting those. But just something to think about during this whole process is, if this is something you want to do, you have to think long term. You have to think about winning over another photographer, similar to winning over a client. And that takes a lot of trust. And that sounds weird, but if you can win over a person and say, hey, I'd like to work with you and I'd like to be paid, if you're asking for a fee, or maybe they're already offering a fee, like, think long term, because that person ideally has more gigs for you that you could potentially get on if you do a good job. And I think that is really crucial. And a lot of people don't think about that when they're going into second shooting. But yeah, so there are two ways to get into second shooting. One, is to find a photographer that you really like or really enjoy and reach out to them. And I think that this is you're not going to have as much traction with this as you would when a photographer is looking for a second shooter. But if you just want to if you just want to cold email, or cold Instagram DM your favorite Instagram photographer or favorite photographer, just reaching out and saying, hey, I would like to, work with you. And, I'm learning, and you can kind of tell them about yourself, then that's going to be, that's a good start. But something I would say about this is before you reach out, before you write that email saying, oh, I would love to work with you. And even if you listen to this episode and you're like, oh, Adam, I want to work with you, which there's probably nobody because I'm just a silly bearded guy. You can, reach out to them. But something I'd always say is try to research first. A lot of photographers, if they're kind of have a bigger following or if they're full time, they might have a Facebook group for photographers. Or they might have some kind of education course, or like for me, I have a Patreon, and I'm going to consider my Patreon members for second shooting even more because I know that they kind of feel the same vibe as me. And they kind of have the same personality as me. And, I would research that main photographer and just see if they have anything first on second shooting. And, that way, just like you're not reaching out as kind of a give me opportunity. You're looking to give to the main photographer. You want to set yourself up as an asset for them. The second way of finding second shooting gigs is obviously just through forum posts, right? So a lot of mine, if I ever need a second photographer, a lot of times I'll reach out on Facebook to professional groups that I'm a part of, where I pretty much support a lot of the people in there and know that there's solid photographers in that group. And, so I'll reach out and I'll kind of give instructions. And so a lot of photographers will give instructions, and honestly, guys, like, people do not follow these instructions. And I'm going to tell a story about why this is important. So there's a band named Van Halen, 80s hair rock band, and they were awesome and they are really cool. And most musicians have what's called a rider. And so that rider is like the information that bands give venues in advance saying, hey, here's what we need. Here's what we need to set up to play. Here's what we need to be happy. And that's everything from like the boring microphone guitar-esque stuff. That's also in the rider, but to also the fun stuff, like if you ever watched MTV Cribs, like the rappers have, alcohol, or they'll have, colored food or all kinds of things. And so Van Halen specifically wrote in the rider that they want a bowl of M&Ms and they want all of the brown ones taken out. To which you're saying now, like, what? Adam, what the frick are you talking about? But honestly, like, brown M&Ms taste the same as all the other colors, right? And the goal here was not that Van Halen didn't like brown M&Ms, and it's just the idea that in a multitude of repeatable events, whether it be weddings or concerts, a lot of people in the industries treat it just like any other event, right? Those music venues, they are having concerts every night. So they're like, every band just needs the same stuff. It's totally fine. But that's not true. And attention to detail is really important. And so something that Van Halen did is they put that note in there about the brown M&Ms. Like, hey, we don't want any brown M&Ms. We want them all picked out and thrown away. And that was something in the rider that if it wasn't done, it was kind of a clue to see how venues are maybe going to manage the rest of the rider. It was kind of a tell, if you will. And so that's really important. So for example, and I'm just ranting a little bit, but if I post that I need a second photographer, what I'll usually say is, hey, I need a second photographer for 8 hours or all day on these dates in this state. That wasn't supposed to rhyme, but yeah, I'll say where it is, when and where, and then I'll say how much I can pay, and I'll say email me with full galleries, which we'll get to. What I mean by that is client galleries, not something on your website. And so for me, at least, I'm looking for somebody who has a little bit more experience than maybe somebody who's new, but the example is all the same. A lot of times what I'll get emails from, that's if I even get email. Most of the time you'll just get comments. They'll be like, hey, I'm available. And they'll drop their website. And one, they might even be a good photographer, but they didn't follow the instructions, right? And that's not a pride thing coming from me. I am simply the person positioning the job and positioning the position. And so a lot of times it kind of bugs me, and it bugs a lot of photographers that I talk to, where people will just drop their name and their website like, hey, here's my stuff. You like it? And it's just, that's not exactly what needs to happen. Like, this person left their instructions. And at least for me, I know professionally, I don't check my Facebook every day. So I might have picked, a second photographer that wasn't as good as the person that commented, but the second photographer that paid attention and followed the instructions is going to get the gig. So hopefully that makes sense and that wasn't too ranty. The other thing too, so is if you actually email them or contact them after they've reached out and they're asking for a full wedding gallery or something like that, what that means is not just a little gallery on your site with like 5 images from a wedding. Like, I deliver usually like 500 to 1,000 photos to a wedding client, and that's what I expect to see from somebody, even if they second shot. Especially if they're having never, been a lead photographer before, but they've second shot a lot. Like, I expect them to give me kind of the full range of how they shoot. What are they thinking? How do they solve problems? I'm looking at that visually and paying attention to that. And it's just the same thing that you would deliver to a client. That's what I want to see. The next thing is to be honest about your experience when reaching out. And I know sometimes, like, we're talking to people and we just start getting FOMO, or we get imposter syndrome and we're nervous and we're like, oh yeah, I've been shooting for so-and-so, or I've got plenty of gigs under my belt. Like, you're doing everybody a disservice if you're not being honest. Like, just be honest. Like, it's totally okay to say, hey, I've only shot one wedding. It was my uncle's. We were inside of a zoo, and just some random thing. Like, it's totally okay to be honest about that. Something I would include whenever you're applying for a second shooting position is to say, like, how many weddings have you lead shot? If the answer is 0, that's totally okay. But just be honest about it. How many weddings have you second shot before? Like, I think those things are really important, and that's what the photographer wants to see. If I saw any number that was double or maybe triple digits, I think, oh man, this person really has put some time in. That's really cool. But if they're new, then I can kind of see where they're at and what they're thinking. Thirdly, when it comes to your experience and your gear and stuff like that, just kind of try to keep it short. Give them the facts. Tell them a little bit more about what you shot before. And if you have less experience, I would say offer to shoot for free, especially if this is a cold email and you're not reaching out after somebody else pitched. If you're just reaching out to somebody you respect in the industry, offer to work for free. Hey, can I assist on a shoot? Hey, are there any ideas that you want to execute where you need an extra hand? What can I do to help? I want to learn from you. Don't say, hey, can I buy you coffee and pick your brain for a minute? Like, that person is doing your dream job. Like, obviously, their knowledge is worth more than a cup of coffee. Hopefully, it should be. I always get way annoyed about the pick your brain comment. And I'm just like, and those guys aren't even like you who are listening to the podcast. I'm like, there are 25 episodes on here that are free information. Like, there's no secret that I leave out. Like, everything is here. And so, anyway, that was a little bit of a rant. But if you don't have any experience, offer to shoot for free. Or even just assist. So even if they have a second photographer and you just want to be like, hey, I've just never been to a wedding where I've been working it. Like, what is that like? How do I do that? Is there anything I can do? Can I carry your bag? Can I be just attentive? I think that's making yourself available. Like, that is a big deal, and showing that you care and showing that you are ready to help in any way possible is going to get you hired better than if you're just like, hey, here's my work. What's up? Like, you just have to be more intentional about how you can sell yourself and make sure that you're an asset to the photographer. Here's a tip when it comes to reaching out to be a second shooter is I would make a kind of an email template for yourself. Have your favorite gallery or 2 galleries in there, a short gear list. Maybe it's like, hey, I have this body, I have these few lenses, how many weddings you've shot. So just kind of like a form almost. And just have that ready so that if you do see a second shooting opening for a certain gig and you're available, like, all you have to do is just copy and paste that. Just send that video over and be like, what's up? Let's do this. And you'll be professional. You'll already be ready to go. And I think that's really fun. Or even if you add in there something about yourself, like, oh, I really love peanut butter and chocolate donuts. Like, that's kind of fun. And just kind of, especially if you know something about that photographer and you just say something that they like, it'll get their attention. I think that's really cool. So it's something you can do to kind of save a little bit of time and not feel so stressed out about that. But after that, I mean, we're like 20 minutes in so far, guys. We have a lot more to go over. But after that, let's say that you have contacted the photographer, they've contacted you back, and they're like, hey, I like your stuff. This sounds like it's going to be an appropriate gig for you. let's talk about this. The next step is a contract. You're like, oh, Adam, I'm just second shooting. Like, it doesn't matter. A contract. You need this. This is necessary. It protects both them and you. Like, that's people always think contracts are one-sided. Like, no. There's an agreement on both sides. And I think it's really good to have a contract. So make sure that they have one. If they don't have one for you, volunteer to make one and see if they would agree to it. Take the initiative, because I think that would be way awesome if a second photographer was like, hey, Adam, you need this? Here, I got you. Like, I already have a contract, but like, go do that. Secondly, you want to figure out if and when you can use the photos. Now, at least in this episode, I'm primarily thinking about you guys having access to the photos that you shot and being able to use them at least in social media and your portfolio, which is like, that's a pretty standard goal. Like, as long as you can use them there, or even in just like a blog post, that's an okay thing. So make sure to clarify if and when you can use the photos. So for me, all of my second photographers can use any of the photos they want. They can edit the photos however they want. They can use them anywhere other than advertising, and they can't reach out to the client. And they also have to wait 2 months until after the wedding day. That way there's just a little bit of a step ahead, if you will. But they can use the photos as much as they want. The next thing is figuring out how much you'll get paid. Working out the money. You want to figure out how much you'll get paid, if anything, whether it's hourly, whether it's just a day rate. You want to make sure you iron out that. And is there any opportunity you could get paid less? Like, say he or she needs you for 8 hours, and you only work 6. Are you going to get a smaller rate? You need to figure out how much you'll get paid, but then also define when you'll get paid. For me, I usually tell the second photographers, hey, as soon as you would like, invoice me, send me an invoice or a Venmo request or whatever, and I'll pay that right away. Some photographers like to give you a check like the night of the wedding, and maybe they've already like accounted for it. I'm not a huge fan of like transactions the night of the wedding, just because I'm mostly like focused on the client. But it is important to figure out when you'll get paid. Some photographers are going to have a 30-day payout cycle though, so be prepared for that. Just like clients, if you have any corporate clients, a lot of times they have a 30-day payout cycle, so that can be kind of weird, but it's useful for you. The next thing, are travel and food covered? And if so, are there any clauses or anything like that to look for? Make sure that is defined in your contract. So, as an example for me, anything outside of 60 miles from the center of Washington, D.C., I pay my second photographers a certain amount per mile that they drove. And then immediately I start covering all meals for that day. So something to think about, just make sure you're covered. I would also say too, like, if it's a photographer you really like and want to really work with and it seems like a good relationship, I'm always going to say, like, work for less, learn for more. Like, that's a big deal. Is, if you can make enough to get you there, then that's all that's going to matter. So that's really important. And then after that, once you've gotten the contract squared away, you're like, man, Adam, all of this for a second shooting gig? Yeah, I know, but trust me, like, you can make bank. And if you do everything in this episode for 6 months, like, you'll go full time, period. That's just what I'm going to say right now. After the contract, try to ask for a meeting with the main photographer, whether that's phone, whether that's Skype. Take them out for coffee. Do not pick their brain. Well, at least not, like, don't pick it, in the same way we talked about earlier. And this is really just to get to know you if you don't know them already. Like, present yourself, kind of just be who you are, and kind of figure out what their personality is, things that they don't like certain times. Just kind of feel them out a little bit. I always say to ask them what their expectations are for their second photographer. Hey, is it just kind of go my own way, or is it, do I need to get specific shots of a certain thing happening? So, for example, I always have my second photographers try to get the formals of the wedding party that I can't be with. So if I'm with the bride, they're getting the groom. If I'm with the groom, they're with the bride. They're getting the formals of those, just so it helps kind of save some time on bigger wedding parties. Secondly, personal style. How does that main photographer approach clients? Are they really hyper and high pitched and really excited? Are they more laid back and kind of chill? Are they kind of standoffish and just kind of like documentarian and artsy? So kind of read that and make sure that you plan on matching that. Essentially, you don't want to kind of have this weird unequal thing. Like if two people are pumped and excited, then that's totally fine. But if one person's pumped and one person is laid back and quiet, that can be kind of weird. And you don't want to make your personality something of note more than the other photographer. Like you don't want to be noticed for being different, if you will, in the situation. It's good to blend in. The third thing in that meeting with the lead photographer is just clarifying any details, the timeline, who's who, where's it at. It's okay to clarify everything. Like you can even bring a copy of the contract and just make sure that you have all of that ready to go. So, make sure that you have a meeting, whether it's phone or whatever, and just kind of chat. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes you got to have that meeting right before the wedding, so sometimes I'll meet my photographers half an hour before the wedding starts. And that's just not ideal. That's not what we want. So ideally you can be on the phone or you can Skype or something like that. And after all of that, it's finally time to get to the main thing, aka the wedding day. The first thing, the main way I would describe everything you need for this particular day is just be ready to shoot. So when you first arrive to the wedding, have your cameras formatted. Like all your cards are ready to go. They're empty. They don't have, the portrait session from the night before. You're not thinking like, oh, can I delete that? Do you have enough cards to work on? Like, be prepared to shoot when you arrive. Also, set your cameras up in the way that you want them, the way that you're best going to shoot, because that's hopefully what you showed the main photographer in your galleries. And that's really important. Also, too, if you ever rented any equipment, say, hey, I'm renting a second body. Well, those second bodies don't come set up. Like, they're not even set to English, like they don't even have their language set up. And so you might need to change some things. Like, are you shooting in RAW? Are we shooting in JPEG? Like, you have to make sure that you're ready. Like, to me, that is a professional thing to be ready. Also, too, you want to make sure that your clocks in any cameras are synced to the accurate wedding day, and make sure, whether you use your phone or whether you use like Google or the time clock and stuff like that, make sure your cameras are already synced, even if the photographer wants you to sync them again in front of them. Like, make sure they're synced. Like, just be ready to shoot when you arrive. The wedding day is not for any like firsts. Like, oh, I've never used this camera before. Oh, I never used this lens before. Like, especially if you're a second photographer, just be surefire. Like, your main photographer is hiring you for the expectation that you've given them. Secondly, unless specified, keep it light. Like, one bag. I've had photographers bring 3 or 4 bags, and sometimes there's food in one bag, and that's totally fine. I have a lot of photographers that are gluten-free, but I have other photographers that bring all their gear to second shoot, and I'm like, hey, we really don't need that. Like, just have a shoulder bag or whatever you like to shoot on. And some of my photographers just have 2 bodies, on a belt or on a chest thing, and that's all they bring. And I'm like, hey, that's totally cool. Like, keep it light. Just be mobile. It helps you be better to assist the main photographer. And for me, a lot of times if I have all my gear with me, I'm not as creative. I'm not as ready to make something different and new and try different things because I'm not as mobile. And so keep it light. I always say you need less gear than the lead photographer. Maybe that's a body, maybe 2 bodies, even if one's a backup, a few lenses, and a flash. At least for me, I never require off-camera flash skills for my second photographers. Like, that's not my expectation. But a lot of photographers, might want something else. So just make sure it's specified. But I try to keep it light. Thirdly, be as helpful as possible from the beginning. Like, figure out the pain points of the main photographer. So if you have experience, what annoyed you? What are you thinking about? What do you wish was different during a wedding day? Like, how can you help this main photographer in any way, whether it's personally or photo-wise or something like that, whether it's carrying a bag or holding onto a lens or going to retrieve a lens from your bag or go adjust something. Like, just be helpful, like, be ready to go. Like, we used to always say, like, be proactive, like attentive and proactive. Like, you are ready to go at moment's notice and you can go fix something. But at the same time, if you are asked to go adjust something and you don't know anything about that particular subject, or you're like, how do I adjust that stand? Just be honest. Like, don't be afraid to ask. Don't mess up somebody's gear and then be like, oh no, I messed it up. Like, just go ask. Secondly, if you offer to set something up and the main photographer says no, then don't do it. Which I know sounds weird. You're like, Adam, you just told me to pack light. I know. So a lot of photographers don't pack light, and sometimes they'll bring their own off-camera flash system, or they'll bring a medium format film camera or something like that. And they'll say, hey, like, I brought this, I might try it out a little bit, blah, blah, blah. And if the main photographer says, hey, you don't have to do that, or we really don't need to do that, or I don't think today would be the best time to try that, maybe at another wedding, like, it's so obvious to me, but just respect that, because I found that in situations where that's not a hard line, like, read the person. If they don't want you to do that, then don't do that. Even if you think what you're supposed to be doing is better, just ask them. You can always over communicate, but if they say no, then they say no. Like, don't do that. I know that sounds crazy, but I've had it happen before. The next thing, wedding day, shoot as much of the wedding as if you were the primary photographer. Think of the story that you need to tell. Who are the people? Where are you at? What are the details? What's the context? What are the relationships there? Shoot it as if you're a primary. Hunt down those stories. I think it's really important just to know what you're thinking throughout the day, but at the same time, don't be invasive. So if the main photographer is there, don't go crazy. And sometimes I'll ask if I am a second photographer, I'll ask the main photographer, hey, do you mind if I get a few portraits with the couple? Like, give me 1 minute, which is kind of a fun exercise. And a lot of the photographers are like, yeah, sure, that's totally fine. And that's usually a fun time, like, just to be like, hey, like, the couple might know you a little bit. And at the same time, I'll offer, if there is time, to my second photographers. Like I said before, read the vibe of the other photographer, of the main photographer. If they're friendly and personal, you be friendly and personal. If they're laid back and chill, you be laid back and chill. If you're the kind of photographer that likes to show people their photo after you've shot it, but the main photographer is not, then that means don't show them the photo. Like, you're not trying to win the client. You're trying to win the photographer, which I know sounds weird, but like, if that photographer wins, then you win. Does that make sense? Like, again, at least for me, I want to pay my second photographers a lot of money. I want to have a small amount of them, and I want to have them shoot all the time. Like, I want to have the same people. So if I win, then you win. And because of everything we've talked about so far, you can win as well and be a main photographer. So something to think about. Something fun too on the wedding day, whenever it's more of a smoother time, let's say getting ready, maybe it's just portraits and everything's a little bit more laid back, not during the ceremony. You can ask pre-ceremony. You can ask questions just like, hey, what are you looking for? What are you thinking about? How do you go about shooting in this light? What do you do for your camera? Blah, blah, blah. Like, don't go too crazy, but it's okay to ask a question. I think it's important to let the photographer know that you're inquisitive, and lots of photographers love to teach, including myself. And the last thing, again, which should be obvious, is don't be on your phone unless you're looking at the timeline, which that should be another tip. I did not write that down. Have the timeline with you in paper and in digital forms if you can, digital at least, and make sure your phone's charged and all that stuff. But just don't be on your phone, like, unless you're texting the main photographer or talking to the main photographer, like, just don't, as much as possible, as much as you can help it. Just don't, because you represent somebody else's company, somebody else's vibe, somebody else's dream job, and you would never want somebody to do that to you. So don't be on your phone. Lastly, now we get into the post-wedding second shooter workflow, to which you're like, Adam, why do I have to do this? Like, I just hand over the photos and then I'm done, right? And yeah, you could be done. But if you want to become a full-time photographer, or you want to grow in your experience or have more social proof, then listen to the next steps. You would not like to, you can skip the next few minutes. But the first thing you do after a post-wedding, or after the first thing you do after a wedding, is you've given them your cards maybe, or you worked out just how you're going to get the photos over to them. So for me, I dump my second photographer's photos that night at the wedding. Like, I usually let them leave earlier, and we've already dumped photos. They're just there with my laptop near an outlet somewhere, hopefully, if we're lucky, and they're just dumping their photos onto an external hard drive. And that way they get to keep their cards, they keep their equipment, because a lot of times I have to travel, and I try to just keep them in the same spot. But post-wedding, you've delivered your photos to your photographer, and you're essentially done with your functional requirement. And hopefully you've gotten paid, which that's actually step 2, but make sure you're getting paid. One of the things I like to do after a photographer's second shot for me is have a phone call or an email and just kind of walk through what I liked and what I didn't like about their photos or maybe their style or notes from the day. And so I would say, make sure that you ask, like send that email a few days after the wedding or a few days after the event and just be like, hey, I would love to talk about this, or I'd love to know what you thought. How can I improve? Would you hire me again? That's a main question. Would you hire me again? Like, that is a big deal. And I think that'll help a lot. And hopefully the photographer will say, hey, here's what I think you could work on. Here are some tips, and say, hey, I would hire you again. Or, hey, I think you should assist. I think you should assist first before second shooting. It's all about being self-aware, and it might be scary to email and ask somebody what they thought of you and how you do things, but you're there to learn. And if it's somebody you look up to or you think has a successful business, you can always learn something. I've second shot more in the past year than I did my first 5 years of business, because I just want to learn. I want to see how other photographers work. I want to hang out with them. I want to just kind of have a little bit of fun. And so it's definitely something you can do. Number 2, make sure you got paid. Just go look at the contract, make sure it's not a 30-day payout. And if it is, wait until the 30 days to complain. Just make sure you're gotten paid and make sure you're set up to go on that. The third thing is fully cull and edit and schedule a blog post with just your photos from the day. And at first you're like, oh no, I might not have enough for the story. Well, then you got to make sure that you shot it correctly. But I would really do a blog post. I would, edit it your way, think about it your way, write your own words. Some photographers will make sure that you have to put credit for that you were shooting for somebody else there, but make sure you do all that. Make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. But do that. And this is kind of what we talked about in the beginning. One, you're going to get the SEO from that. So make sure you're disproportionately going hard on the blog content, text and photos, all your alt tags, all that stuff that we'll get to in other episodes. Make sure you're getting, whatever SEO you're going for, use that wedding to get there. Only show what you want to show. You don't have to please a client with these particular photos. Like, show what you loved about that particular wedding and only that. I would definitely do that. And the last thing is, I would say create a full gallery of this wedding. We're like, Adam, that's a lot of work to not get paid and to deliver to this. But if you want more gigs like this will show how you shoot. This will show what you're thinking of. This will show how you edit. And what I always say is that this creates an asset to use again, both for your clients. So if a client says, hey, have you ever shot at this wedding or at this wedding venue? And say, oh, I've second shot there before. Here's what that looked like. That can be really cool. And at the same time, you have another gallery to send photographers when they're about to hire you, which is really important. So hopefully that clears everything up. And, I know that was a lot, and this is another long episode of just Adam talking, but this is important. And I think for anybody who is a photographer or a budding photographer, second shooting is a really good way to get into weddings and to shoot full time and to tackle your dream, if you will, and to learn a lot in the process. Imagine all the photographers you could learn from and ask questions of, and why do they do this and why do they do that? Whether it's me or somebody else, join a group, ask questions, join my Patreon. It's $3. Just ask questions and be engaged with those certain things. And so just a recap. There's a really long recap. Benefits of being a second shooter are you get experience and you can learn. You can up your problem solving skills and build your portfolio and have SEO and social content. You can use those photos for Instagram and they will show you what you want to shoot. That'll be awesome. You've learned how to get second shooting weddings. You've learned how to get second shooting gigs with other photographers and how to approach them properly. Make sure that you do that. Make sure that you do that email template so that you can save time and save money. And then next, once you get the gig, get your contract going, get your meeting, and be ready to shoot. And then make a blog post and do a full gallery after that, even if you second shoot. Super important, just for you and just for clients. Hopefully that helped a little bit for anybody who is trying to get into second shooting or trying to get into weddings. And I know that it was a lot, and so you might have to go back and listen and write notes. And I have a little bit of this in the show notes, so you can just kind of swipe over if you're in one of the podcast apps and look at it. feel free to email if you have any questions about this or you need me to clarify on something. This is a work in progress, and not every photographer is looking for what I'm looking for, but this is, I think, a good start on how you can serve a main photographer and really get more gigs for yourself and really get engaged with the photographers that are around you and in your community and get to know the venues and get to know the couples around here. I think that is super important. So thank you so much for listening. One request is, can you leave us a review on iTunes? Pretty please. A 5-star review would be great. It just helps us get into the charts a little bit more, and it would mean a lot to me, and I would love to read your review. So shoot me a DM on Instagram at the Bearded Tog. If you left a review, let me know. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much.